The day after my wife jumped into the river to end her life, her family held a funeral for her. Upon hearing the news, I immediately put on a custom-made suit and a red tie, dressing up to attend the ceremony. As soon as I stepped into the venue, my wife's parents immediately began to curse at me. "George, you murderer. How dare you show your face here? If it weren't for you constantly abusing her, would our Willow have jumped into the river?" They screamed, but no one expected what happened next. I smiled faintly, took out a portable speaker from my bag, and started playing some DJ music. Boom shaKaLaKa, I yelled as I danced. "Come on, everyone, follow my rhythm and let's have a good time." Chapter 1. I came to attend my wife's funeral. However, my wife's mother angrily shouted, "You bastard! How dare you come here? Give my daughter back to me." A middle-aged woman, dressed in mourning clothes, grabbed at me and pulled wildly. It took great effort for me to yank her hand off my brand new suit. I threatened, "I suggest you stop. This suit is very expensive. If you tear it, you won't even be able to sell your house to pay for the damage." Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her voice was hoarse as she continued to rant. "You beast! I should never have let my daughter marry you, or she wouldn't have died." Her eyes were full of murderous intent. Indeed, back then, Willow had defied her parents' wishes and secretly registered our marriage at the Civil Affairs Bureau. But so what? I didn't force her into it. I smiled and said, "Mrs., you're being unreasonable. Marriage is something both people want. How can you blame me alone?" Just then, Willow's father, Martin, stormed over, shouting, "You murderer, what are you doing here? Who let you come? You're not welcome here. Get out." But I ignored him completely and instead casually picked up some of the offerings on the table and started eating. I chewed while commenting, "Seriously, did you guys not buy the right fruits? Willow never liked apples, didn't you know?" Perhaps my behavior was too outrageous, because the relatives who had come to mourn began whispering among themselves. "Did you hear? This man abused his wife so badly that his daughter jumped into the river to kill herself." Yeah, I saw the body with my own eyes. She was covered in bruises. It was horrible. The worst part is, Willow was pregnant with a child almost 3 months along when she died. Can you imagine the rage? Delicious. The more they whispered, the more excited I became. Following the beat of the DJ music blaring from my speaker, I started bouncing in place. Just then, someone in the crowd shouted, "Beat him," and the Liu family relatives who had come to the funeral started to surround me. But before they could do anything, someone shouted, "Don't move, the police are here." At that crucial moment, a large group of police officers rushed into the venue. When I saw that leading the group was Officer Chan, I waved enthusiastically and called out, "Officer Chan, I'm over here." I was the one who called the police. Officer Chan, hearing his name, gave me a side glance. Frowning, he said, "Mr. Wang, I advise you not to cause trouble at someone's funeral. Even the police won't be able to protect you if you do." I feigned innocence, pointing at the people who had just tried to attack me. "How is it me causing trouble? They were the ones trying to hit me," I said, quickly hiding behind Officer Chan. I continued, "I was just here to attend my wife's funeral, but they insisted on kicking me out." The moment I finished speaking, Martin stood up from the crowd, pointing at me and shouting, "You're the one who killed my daughter, and you still dare to mention her name. Get out of here." At that moment, Willow's colleague, Makoto, appeared beside Martin. He accused me, "Officer, this man has been abusing his wife for a long time. He drove my daughter to suicide. You must arrest him." Officer Chan slowly removed his police hat, glanced at Willow's photo, and with a look of regret on his face, said, "We have officially opened an investigation into the abuse claims. We're still gathering evidence." Suddenly, Officer Chan paused, turned his head to look at me, and said, "Last night, we summoned Mr. Wang as part of our investigation. However," I finished his sentence for him, "however, today is my wife's funeral. I specifically applied to the police to attend." I stepped out from behind Officer Chan, grinning widely. Before I could say more, Martin exploded. He shouted, "You shameless bastard! How dare you call her your wife? I won't allow you to call her that." The more he spoke, the more agitated he became, spitting on my face. Seeing this, I quickly hid behind Officer Chan again. Peering my head out, I said, "I didn't make her jump into the river. Why can't I be here?" Chapter 2. What did you say? Seeing the situation about to get out of control, Officer Chan signaled a few officers to escort me out. But when I heard that, I immediately objected. The funeral hadn't even started yet. As the husband of the deceased, how could I leave before it even began? The most crucial part was that if I left now, all that money I spent on this outfit would be wasted, especially this custom-made suit, which I had ordered a week in advance. With a firm tone, I said, "Officer Chan, the funeral hasn't even started yet. I can't leave." Seeing that Officer Chan seemed a bit hesitant, I quickly flattered him, "With you here to protect my safety, I'm sure everything will be fine." Just then, the officiant, who was responsible for the ceremony, called out from the back hall, "The time has come. Family members, Please take your positions. The Liu family was very superstitious, and not wanting to miss the auspicious moment, they reluctantly left me to stand aside for the time being. I silently followed Officer Chan into the main hall. Before long, the officiant began the ceremony in a very professional manner. He said, "Before we begin, please have the deceased's family members take their positions to my left." Family members, he was calling for me. I straightened my tie and confidently walked up. But just a few steps in, Martin shot me a fierce glare. "Get lost. You don't deserve to stand here," he shouted. I wasn't upset at all. I simply stood next to him. Casually, I said, "Uncle, are you really going to argue with me in front of everyone? If you delay the good time, don't blame me." Martin clenched his fists, his fingers cracking, but thankfully he didn't try to push me away any further. Willow was an only child, so her parents stood beside me. During the family gratitude session that followed, every single relative who approached me wore a look of malice. But fortunately, my greatest strength is my magnanimity, and I returned each of their glares with a smile. I even gave a few of them a heart sign with my hands. The officiant continued. Willow, born on the 7th day of the 8th month in 1999, passed away on the 3rd day of the 1st month in 2024, at the age of 25. Looking back on her life, it was filled with brilliance but also regret. She was filial to her parents, united with her colleagues, loyal to her family. But the next second, ha 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 ha, the previously quiet hall suddenly erupted with an unexpected laugh. Everyone's eyes turned to me. I quickly covered my mouth, trying to stifle my laughter. "Sorry, everyone. I just remembered something funny, and I couldn't help myself," I apologized. "Please, continue with the ceremony." I returned to my spot. But of course, a funeral doesn't just continue like that, especially in a family as superstitious as the Lius. Sure enough, Martin was now standing in front of me, his face filled with rage. He yelled, "George, if you don't explain yourself right now, you won't leave this hall alive." I looked at him with an innocent expression. "Uncle, I don't understand what you want me to explain," I replied. He gritted his teeth and said, "I see you're deliberately causing trouble. Are you happy that my daughter is dead?" At this point, Willow's mother also stepped forward, pointing her finger at me and cursing. "Do you have any humanity left? You killed my daughter, and now you're messing around at her funeral." I took a sip of water and patiently explained, "Auntie, you're overthinking it. I really just remembered something happy, and that's why I couldn't help but laugh." But as soon as the words left my mouth, I became the target of everyone's fury. The insults and curses rained down on me, and my wife's funeral turned into a chaotic scene resembling a street market full of gossiping old women. Seeing that my goal was achieved, I slowly pulled out my phone. "Hello, Dr. Leo. Have you arrived?" I asked. Chapter 3, Mr. Wong. "I'm right outside the venue. I'll be there in a moment." In less than a minute, a few doctors in white coats found me through the crowd. "Mr. Wong, thank you for your contributions to the medical field. On behalf of all the doctors at our hospital, we are truly grateful," one of them said. I straightened my hair and shook Dr. Leo's hands. "No need to thank me. Anyway, she's already dead. There's no use in keeping her around," I replied casually. The sudden turn of events left Martin and his wife dumbfounded. After a few seconds of stunned silence, Martin finally regained his composure. "Who are you? Why are you here at my daughter's funeral?" he asked. Dr. Leo was about to speak, but I suddenly slapped my forehead and said, "Oh no, I forgot to inform you too. Here's the thing. I asked Dr. Leo to come and take Willow's body. She still has some organs that can be used." As I explained, I took out the organ donation papers I had prepared in advance. "Uncle, Auntie, due to time constraints, I forgot to tell you this earlier. You won't hold it against me, will you?" The two of them spoke in unison. What? Who gave you the right to take my daughter's body? And you, as a doctor, don't you know that organ trafficking is a serious crime?" Martin and his wife glared at Dr. Leo with such intensity, it felt as if they were about to devour him alive. Seeing this, I quickly pulled Dr. Leo behind me. "It's my decision," I said. "I'm Willow's husband, and of course, I have the right to dispose of her body after she's gone." Just as I finished speaking, Martin suddenly lunged onto Willow's coffin. He shouted, "I dare you to touch my daughter. I'm her father, and no one can move her without my consent." I'm sure this scene touched all of our relatives and friends in the hall. What a father's love for his daughter. Dr. Leo was also confused, and he turned to me and asked, "Mr. Wong, didn't you say your wife was an orphan? So who are these people?" I patted Dr. Leo on the shoulder and signaled him to wait. Then, I took the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone, friends and family of Willow," I began. "I'm George, Willow's husband." As everyone's attention shifted to me, I continued, "Today is, well, not a joyous day, but a sad one. My wife Willow has left me forever." But I suddenly drew out the last word for effect. "As her husband, I had a bold idea last night. I've decided to donate her organs for research at the hospital, so Willow can continue to shine in this world. There was a moment of silence in the hall. Then, the place erupted in an uproar. Everyone present was a relative or close friend of Willow's. Now, they looked at me with the same hatred, especially Martin and his wife, who were close by. They screamed, "Beast, you're a monster. Does the law still exist in this world? Is your heart made of stone? Yesterday, your wife jumped into the river and died, and today you want to donate her organs. What kind of twisted freak are you? Officer, what are you waiting for? Is even the law powerless against this man now?" I was immediately drowned in a barrage of insults. No one wanted to listen to me anymore. Some younger, more emotional people even started throwing beer bottles at me. Luckily, I reacted quickly and barely managed to dodge. In desperation, I decided to use Officer Chan as a shield once again. I ran and yelled, "Officer Chan, come save me." But to my surprise, even Officer Chan didn't want to help. The look he gave me sent a chill down my spine. "George," he said coldly, "I swear I'll find evidence of your domestic abuse and lock you up." Seeing that no one was on my side, I had no choice but to hide. In the end, I found refuge by standing on Willow's coffin. "Don't move. If you do, I'll throw her out," I shouted. Everyone froze, their faces turning pale. Even Martin, who had been shouting the loudest, now started to speak calmly. "George, get down from there. I promise I won't hurt you anymore." I scanned the crowd, and my gaze finally rested on a familiar figure. "Who the hell threw that beer bottle?" I shouted. Before long, Willow's colleague, Makoto, stood up from the crowd. "I did." "What's the problem?" he said defiantly. I squinted at him and sneered. "I heard you're my wife's colleague. Your name is Makoto, right?" Makoto didn't back down. He looked straight at me and said, "That's right. I'm Makoto, and I've disliked you for a long time." "George." I wasn't angry. I simply continued asking him, "I also heard from the police that you called them after my wife jumped into the river. I had just returned from a business trip the night before. As soon as I landed, the police took me away. Later, the officers told me they had received a report from my wife's colleague, accusing me of domestic abuse." "Well, you killed your wife, and now you're upset that someone called the police?" he asked loudly, though Makoto was standing below me. His voice was still booming. I looked down at him from above. "It's fine, as long as you admit it. That's all I need," I said, then suddenly changed the subject. "Now, tell me, when did you start an affair with my wife?" Chapter 4. You're talking nonsense. Makoto froze when he heard my words. He said, "George, let me warn you, you can eat whatever you want, but you shouldn't say whatever you like, especially not at Willow's funeral." I sneered. I didn't expect this guy, Makoto, to be so stubborn. I replied, "The child that my wife was carrying, it's probably yours, right?" As soon as I finished speaking, Martin couldn't sit still anymore. "George, stop spouting nonsense. I won't allow you to tarnish my daughter's reputation after she's dead," he yelled. "Tarnish her reputation?" I was amused by his words. These two were still putting on a show for me. I said, "You think I'm tarnishing her reputation?" I jumped off Willow's coffin and glared directly at Martin. "Do you dare to swear that you didn't know your daughter was cheating?" Martin was taken aback by my fierce tone and stumbled back. I don't know anything. I just know that you killed my daughter. You're a murderer," he stammered. "That's right," he continued, his voice rising. "Willow's death is all your fault. Everyone saw it. You abused your wife to the point where she had no choice but to jump into the river." Makoto and Martin stood side by side, united in their condemnation. Makoto said, "When your business failed and you were desperate, Mr. Liu took you in. He treated you like his own son and even gave you his daughter's hand in marriage. But how did you repay them? You abused your wife every day, hitting her at every turn. If she hadn't been forced to jump into the river, none of us would have known about it. George, from start to finish, you've been a beast with a human face. Your whole life will be spent behind bars." Makoto continued, his voice growing more agitated, occasionally inciting the onlookers to join in their attack. I calmly watched his performance, thinking of him as nothing more than a clown, and took my phone out of my pocket. "Makoto, why don't you explain what's going on with this photo?" I asked. The next second, a photo of Makoto and my wife, Willow, appeared on the large screen behind me. In the photo, the two were embracing intimately on a bed. Anyone who didn't know them would have assumed they were the ones married. When Makoto saw the photo, his face turned pale. "That's fake. Don't listen to him. This photo is definitely photoshopped," he hissed through gritted teeth. I had anticipated he wouldn't admit it and gave a small smile. The screen switched again, and now it was playing a video. In the video, two naked people were on a bed, passionately entangled with each other. Afterward, the woman lay in the man's arms, her eyes hazy. The men silently lit a cigarette. They said, "Darling, when can we be open about our relationship? I can't wait any longer, baby. Let's wait a bit longer. Once we've tricked him into giving up his shares, then you can divorce him." The man and woman in the video were none other than my wife, Willow, and Makoto, who had been so adamant just moments before. The video played for over 20 minutes, and by the end, Makoto had become the center of attention. He stammered, What? When did you record this?" Makoto nearly stumbled, losing his balance. I thought back carefully before replying. "Probably from your first date." I had my suspicions long ago, a year ago. While Willow was taking a shower, I accidentally saw an unread message on her phone that read, "Baby, are you home yet?" From that moment, I suspected that the woman I had been living with for years was likely cheating on me. To confirm my suspicions, I hired a private investigator to follow her 24/7. It turned out to be even worse than I imagined. Not only was she sleeping with other men behind my back, but she and Makoto, along with her father, had been plotting to take over my company. That explained the large sums of money disappearing from the company's accounts regularly. I had been enduring humiliation for so long, just so I could expose Willow's ugly truth in front of her family and friends at this very moment. But what I didn't expect was that even after all of this, Martin still dared to stand up for Makoto. He said, "Even if my daughter was with someone else, you still shouldn't have abused her, no matter what. That's still a life, and you can't escape the responsibility for my daughter's death." Martin's words kept getting more and more outrageous. He continued, "My daughter can love whoever she wants. You had no right to abuse her, no matter what. She died because of you. Don't think you can escape legal retribution." What a piece of work. This was the first time I'd seen someone try to make cheating sound so pure and noble. I silently watched as the two clowns continued their performance, showing no sign of worry. "Martin, stop acting. Do you really think you're Willow's father?" I said coldly, looking at him. I paused for a moment and then continued, "You don't have any blood relation to Willow. She was bought. You deceived everyone, including Willow herself." I glanced at Willow's body and gave a cold laugh. "She probably died still thinking you were her real father, didn't she?" My words landed like bombs, one after another. At first, I had wondered why Willow had been so bold as to sleep with other men in my own house. But after investigating, I found out that Martin and they had been in cahoots for a long time. Sometimes I even admired his acting skills. At least everyone in the room, including Officer Chan, had been fooled by him. Had I not already known the truth, I might have been moved by his fake fatherly love. But Martin, who was exposed on the spot, still refused to admit anything. Instead, he shamelessly said, "These are all your own delusions. Do you have any proof? Even the police need evidence to solve a case. What proof do you have that what you're saying is true?" I replied. "Simple." I sneered, slowly raised my arm, and pointed at Willow's body in the coffin. I said, "We just need to do a simple paternity test, and we'll know whether the child in her womb is Makoto's, and it will also prove that you have no blood relation to her." Chapter 5. I glanced at the still-dazed doctor in the audience and grabbed the microphone, shouting, "Dr. Leo, is it possible to do a paternity test on a deceased person?" Dr. Leo froze for a moment, then slowly nodded. I said, "Then I'll leave it to you." However, two voices suddenly rang out in unison. "No way, no way." Martin and Makoto shouted almost simultaneously. The next second, Martin suddenly pulled a lighter from his pocket. He threw it with all his might, and the flame landed right on the wreath in front of us. The fire spread instantly. Before long, Willow's entire coffin was consumed by the flames. Officer Chan shouted, "Martin, have you lost your mind?" Seeing this, Officer Chan immediately started evacuating the crowd. Martin laughed. "Ha ha ha. George, didn't expect this, did you? Now you have no evidence, and I'm curious to see how you'll handle me." At this moment, Makoto also seemed unusually excited. He said, "By the way, there's something else you don't know. Your wife had already told me the password to her overseas account, and there's a huge sum of money in there. Enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life." I darkened my expression and quietly watched as they mocked me. I said, "Who said Willow is dead?" Martin burst into wild laughter. "George, stop fooling yourself. With a fire this big, her body is probably reduced to ashes by now." Ha ha ha. I didn't respond directly. I simply smiled faintly, clapped my hands, and said, "Come out." Just then, among the panicked crowd, a figure slowly walked towards us. The person said, "You two really have a heart of stone." The familiar voice reached Martin and Makoto's ears, and they were both petrified on the spot. Martin stammered, "Willow, how did you escape? You were supposed to be in the coffin." He trembled, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Willow said, "Are you disappointed to see that I didn't burn to death?" The woman, dressed in hospital clothes, brushed past me and whispered in my ear, "You won." I merely smiled faintly and then shouted behind me, "Put out the fire." In an instant, dozens of men in black suits appeared from all directions, each holding a fire extinguisher. In less than 10 minutes, the fire was under control. As the smoke cleared, Martin's twisted face gradually emerged. He cursed. "You actually betrayed me." Willow smiled and replied, "Martin, after all this, you still have the nerve to say I betrayed you. If I hadn't been saved from the coffin in time, you probably would have burned me alive by now, right?" The crowd outside the hall, seeing Willow standing next to me, looked shocked and began to murmur. Wasn't she already dead from drowning? How is she suddenly alive again? Did they blow up the body? Look at her arms and legs. There are no more injuries. Could it be that we've all been tricked? Maybe she was never dead at all. But the fire was so huge. If she had really been in that coffin, she would have been burned to ashes by now. The truth was, I had known about Willow's plan with the two of them all along. After transferring all the money, they intended to use a staged death to divert the police's attention and escape overseas. But they never expected that from the very beginning. I had seen through their plot. The reason I went along with their little drama was because Willow and I had made a bet. I bet that Martin and Makoto would indeed kill Willow, destroy the evidence, and run off with the money. Fortunately, I won the bet. As the losing party, Willow would turn herself into the police and, as the sole witness, expose Martin and Makoto's crimes. On the other hand, if I lost, I would hand the company over to her and then retire in the mountains. But I knew I wouldn't lose. Greed is a part of human nature, and it was especially evident in Martin and Makoto. Chapter 6. Martin asked, "When did you rescue her?" He looked pale, like a deflated balloon. I said, "You're in too much of a hurry." He looked confused and asked, "What do you mean?" I replied, "You're afraid that my appearance will disrupt your plan, especially when you saw the police behind me. But you overlooked Dr. Leo." I chuckled lightly and then turned my gaze to Dr. Leo in the crowd. I paused for a moment, then continued, "There was never any body donation. I just found an excuse to let Dr. Leo approach the coffin and, in the chaos, rescue Willow." He responded, No wonder he never took his eyes off the coffin as soon as he came in." I sighed deeply, lowered my head, and said, "Martin, you know, I once treated you like a real father. It's a pity." Martin smiled. Nothing to regret. Just when everyone thought Martin was about to surrender, he suddenly pulled a knife from his pocket. In a flash, he grabbed Willow as a hostage. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Back off, everyone, get back." Even Makoto didn't expect Martin to resort to taking a hostage. Being caught doing this could get him a death sentence. He shouted, "I don't care anymore. My life's already doomed to be spent in prison, so I might as well take a gamble." I was also stunned by this sudden turn of events. Officer Chan reacted swiftly and immediately began evacuating the crowd. The huge hall was now left with just me and Martin's group. Willow said, "Martin, are you crazy? I'm your daughter." Willow, who was being held at knife point, was now trembling, her body shaking. Martin replied, "Daughter, my foot. You're just something I bought with money. If it weren't for you, I would have already run off with the money. Keep talking, and I'll slit your throat." Martin was in a frenzied state, and no one dared question his words. At this moment, Officer Chan slowly stood up. He said, "Mr. Liu, please calm down." He raised both hands, trying to calm the situation and confront Martin. He said, "Put the knife down. Let's sit down and talk it over." "All right." But to his surprise, Martin didn't ease up. Instead, he brought the knife even closer to Willow's neck. Blood began to trickle down her neck. He threatened, "Step back, everyone, step back." Martin had completely lost his sanity. He shouted, "If you take one more step forward, I'll kill her. I'll die with her if I have to." Seeing the situation, Officer Chan had no choice but to slowly back away. Officer Chan said, all right, don't get agitated. As long as you don't hurt her, I'll do whatever you say." Martin responded, "I want 1 million in cash, and a car delivered to me." As Martin continued to retreat, he kept threatening. He said, "I'll give you 10 minutes. If I don't see the money in 10 minutes, get ready to collect her body." Blood had already soaked Willow's clothes. It wouldn't be long before she bled out and died. "Fine," I shouted, raising a bank card high. "This card has 1 million in it. Let her go." As soon as I finished speaking, I threw the card, and it landed right at Martin's feet. At this point, Willow was extremely weak, but she still managed to glance up at me. Her eyes were filled with guilt. Martin fixed his bloodshot eyes on me and then suddenly threw his head back and laughed. "Ha ha ha. George, didn't expect you to be such a sentimental fool. Want to know what your wife said to Makoto in bed?" Chapter 7. She said she never loved you. She also said, "Enough." I clenched my fists, struggling to contain my fury. I said, "I've given you the money. Let her go. Now." Just as Martin bent down to pick up the bank card, Willow suddenly shoved him away. Officer Chan seized the moment and drew his gun. With a loud bang, Martin fell to the ground. "Quick, save her." As soon as I spoke, a team of medical staff rushed in. As Willow was being lifted onto a stretcher and passed by me, her lips moved slightly. It seemed like she was trying to say, "I'm sorry." I turned my head to the side, pretending not to notice. Martin had been shot in the arm by Officer Chan and was now lying on the ground, groaning in pain. I slowly walked up to him and took the bank card from in front of him. I said, "You brought this on yourself." Makoto was immediately escorted into a police car. The farce came to an end. As I walked out of the hall, light rain began to fall. I straightened my clothes and walked out, heading straight for the exit. The next day, I received a call from the hospital. The doctor said Willow wanted to see me. Without a second thought, I refused. The reason I had chosen to save her wasn't because, as Martin had claimed, I still had lingering feelings for Willow. It was simply out of respect for life that I stepped forward. Back when my business failed and I was at my lowest, I had once contemplated ending it all. It was Martin and his daughter who took me in. Because of that, I developed feelings for Willow. Although later I found out that everything was a lie, I still felt a trace of gratitude deep down. Without them, I might not have the life I have now. If my money could save a life, I was willing to pay $1 million. The day Martin was sent to prison, I specifically requested a visit. In the isolation room, Martin, with a scruffy beard and vacant eyes, only regained a semblance of life when I appeared. "Are you here to laugh at me?" Martin's hoarse voice came through the phone. I shook my head. I replied, "No." I silently lit a cigarette and gestured for the prison guard to give him one as well. I said, "You know, you didn't have to go through all that trouble to trick me out of my money. I was already planning to leave the company to you and Willow." As soon as the words left my mouth, Martin abruptly raised his head. He asked, What do you mean?" I took a deep drag on my cigarette and slowly exhaled a ring of smoke. I said, "I have a terminal illness. The doctor said I have less than 3 months to live. My will is on the nightstand, but it's a pity." Just as I was halfway through my cigarette, I began to cough violently. I paused, then continued, "If there's anything to blame, it's your greed." After I left, Martin collapsed to the ground, crying like a broken man. It no longer mattered who his tears were for, because my time was truly running out. The reason I came to tell him all this was to make peace with the regrets in my heart. In the remaining days, I would take the time to enjoy the world. I resigned from my position as chairman of the company and set off on the global tour I had always dreamed of. A month later, I was rushed to the hospital by the staff at a hotel. The doctor said, "His condition has worsened. Ordinary treatments are no longer effective." Lying in the hospital bed, I smiled and said weakly, "It's okay. I don't blame you. It's just a pity there are so many places I never got to visit." And with that, I slowly closed my eyes. However, in the midst of my hazy consciousness, I heard a voice. "Mr. Wong, how do you feel? Is there any discomfort?" "Dr. Leo." Mr. Wong is awake. When I opened my eyes again, I realized I was lying on the operating table. The surroundings were familiar yet strange. I said, "Water." I tried to reach out, but found I couldn't move. The person next to me said, "Mr. Wong, you've just had surgery. You can't drink water yet. I'll use a cotton swab to wipe your lips for you." I asked, "Surgery? What surgery?" I clearly remembered that just before I lost consciousness, the hospital had issued 3 critical condition notices. The person said, "You're lucky. A suitable organ match was found just in time." At that moment, Dr. Leo entered the room. He asked, "How are you feeling? I hope nothing's wrong." I tried moving my body. Aside from some pain at the incision, I felt fine. I asked, "Leo, do you know who saved me?" After hearing my question, Dr. Leo seemed hesitant, but the nurse next to him excitedly chimed in. "It was Miss Liu." Dr. Leo shot her a glare, then awkwardly looked down at me and nodded. "Yes, it was her." I was stunned. "Willow," he replied. "Yes, it was her." Dr. Leo took an envelope from his pocket and placed it on my bed. "She said if you woke up, I should give you this." The envelope had only 3 words on it, "George." I nodded at Dr. Leo to open it for me. Inside, the letter read, "George, you don't need to thank me. When you read this letter, I should already be on my way to prison. Some time ago, Dr. Leo told me you had a terminal illness, and that my organs were a match. So, before I went to prison, I donated them to you. Perhaps this is the only thing I can do for you in my life. I was trafficked when I was young, constantly on the run, until I met you. If it weren't for you putting aside the past and standing up that day, I might not even be alive now. You're a good person, and good people shouldn't die young. So, live well. See the world for me." Signed, Willow. Dr. Leo asked, "Do you want to go see her? You should still have time." I quietly put the letter away and looked out the window. I replied, "No, she wouldn't want me to see her anyway."